begin.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here. And thank you to Candid for hosting us today on this unwieldy topic of reimagining theater and performance during and after the pandemic. I'm very honored to be here with the four panelists who have sizable credentials attached to their names and titles, and you'll meet them shortly. And I would encourage you to take a minute and check out their bios. I'm putting the link into the chat where you can go to the page with the links to their bios. But meet Jarvis Green, founder and producing director, artistic director of JAG Productions. He's up in White River Junction, Vermont, bucolic setting. Elisa Martin is the vice president for arts and events at Brookfield Properties. Hazen Coiler. Okay, Hazen, give me a help here. Hazen Coiler.
It's Kyler.
Kyler, artistic director of the, sorry about that, of the Greenhouse Ensemble, and Bonnie Monty, artistic director of the Shakespeare Theatre of New Jersey. I would encourage you, the panelists, please put your websites into the chat box of your organizations so that everybody can check them out. And meanwhile, to our attendees, some of you already have been giving greetings, but if you'd like to say where you are and what part of the universe you are in the theater and performing arts sector, that would be great. So a quick overview, we're going to be doing roughly dividing this into 4 topics. The first is going to be artists and audiences today. And each of the panelists is going to talk a little bit about what they've been doing in these past 8 months. That's some really exciting and bold new work. Then we're going to talk about funding the work now and funding moving forward, and what are some of the money considerations. Then we're going to talk a little bit about real estate and pushing real estate boundaries. And then we're going to have, for the final part, a magic wand moment for the panelists to talk about sort of what they've learned and what they'd love to see carried forward into the future, or appear magically in the future. And then we'll have a Q&A. You're welcome to put in questions as we go, as has been mentioned, but we will have a specific Q&A at the end of the program. So let's get started. I'm going to ask Bonnie to kick us off here and give us a sense of what's been happening in the Shakespeare Theatre of New Jersey. Bonnie.
Hi, thank you, Julie. Hello, everybody. I'm very excited to be online with everyone today. This is really my first Zoom thing ever. So pardon me if anything goes wrong. But I'm very excited to talk about how we managed to start presenting live performances in the midst of this pandemic. But I kind of want to start by saying that from the outset, I cautioned my staff that we should not instantly leap into the frenzy of virtual programming that was sweeping across the internet when everyone got shut down. First and foremost, we took a slew of action steps to protect the institution in numerous ways, not knowing how long any of this would last. So financially, health-wise, communications-wise, we were taking all kinds of precautions to make sure that we could survive this. And throughout all of it, we were having constant conversations about how we would proceed artistically and programmatically depending on what might unfold. We put a little bit of content online to provide schools who had booked our Shakespeare Live tours with some video options for online study. But for the most part, we resisted producing content for the internet. And I think in part this was because at first we were defining for ourselves what artistic and educational priorities, what they would be going forward. And at the heart of all of our discussions was a commitment to excellence in whatever we ended up producing, and we weren't willing to leap into that virtual / Zoom / streaming boat unless we could do so with pride in what we were creating. And we're not video artists. Our art form is live theater, and that's what we're good at. It's what we know how to do, and how to do it in exemplary fashion. So as information about the virus unfolded slowly but surely, and as conditions were changing constantly and rapidly, we chose for the first 3 months to be very patient and to start creating plans for whatever might evolve throughout all this. And I realized as that was happening that we had the extraordinary good fortune to have a large number of factors in place that might allow us to do live theater if our governor expanded the capacity allowance for outdoor gatherings. So when the schools closed in mid-March, we had made the decision to offer our company of non-equity actors the opportunity to remain in housing free of cost. And we offered them a weekly food allowance and some opportunities to make a little money if they were willing to stay quite isolated as a unit and to follow all the CDC guidelines. Most of them took us up on the offer as they had nowhere to go. They would have been homeless because they were originally contracted to be with us through June. And so most of them had no alternate housing or employment options elsewhere. So to cut to the chase, by midsummer, we not only had a COVID-safe company of actors ready to perform, but we had the very big advantage of having a potential outdoor location, which is just the backyard of our behind-the-scenes support facility. And we were starting to plan to transform it into a safe, kind of pandemic customized performance venue. So once the governor announced that outdoor gatherings of up to 250 people would be allowed, we really began in earnest to design what we dubbed the backyard stage. And we began to plan a very modest kind of trial balloon presentation. We had no idea if anyone would even be willing to attend a performance in the middle of a pandemic. So we created 3 budgets as a start, ensuring that we could do the show without incurring any financial loss. And we created a break-even budget, a modest profit budget, and then a very ambitious budget. And once the show was announced, we sold out in the first week. And we extended what was originally planned as an 8-performance offering to a full 4 weeks with 7 shows a week. We exceeded our ambitious budget goal, and it gave us the impetus to create more. So from the end of September through the end of October, we have been providing and will continue to provide audiences with a very varied and exciting lineup of live performance events, including 2 evenings of music with the great Kate Baldwin doing 2 sold-out concerts for us. We have an upcoming production, which actually opens tonight, of 3 short George Bernard Shaw plays. And then at the end of October, we will be doing a 4-day Halloween event featuring classic horror and kind of gothic, scary tales. In addition to that, we are doing an online Shakespeare book club session this fall, and we're contemplating a number of online programming options, but only if we can produce them at the highest possible level of excellence, despite our lack of financial resources. And we have the great luck to have a safe environment and a COVID-safe company of actors in place with an amazing facility that allows for all kinds of unusual and creative possibilities for creating exciting online content during the winter months. As soon as the weather gets warm again, though, we are going to be re-engaging in outdoor performances, and we'll continue to do so even when we can finally get back into our normal indoor main stage venue. So between this kind of perfect storm of lucky advantages and our willingness to do the work despite the risks, our very theater-hungry, loyal audience base, we have been utterly surprised and thrilled that we've been able to do, even in a very modest fashion, what we're supposed to do, and that's to put on plays live and in person. And it's been a tough but very inspiring achievement for everybody involved. So that's our basic situation at the moment.
That's terrific, Bonnie. Thank you so much. And do you want to just put up the slides that Bonnie sent in, and we can sort of see some of this work? Elizabeth, is that, there we go. So a quick, and Bonnie, if you want to walk us through
Sure.
these.
Sure. This is in the very first show that we did out there. This was still a little bit more of a modest enterprise than it is now. We've actually been enhancing it quite a bit, but this shows how big our backyard is. And it's a faraway view of the stage, which is right up against our building, allowing us to have a kind of backstage entrance. And it seats about, we can seat about 215 people out there. And this was a shot of the very first show we did. It was a 2-play bill, and one night we would present something called Verily Madly Thine, directed by A.C. Horton, who is a company member. And this was a collage of Shakespeare scenes. It was lovely, and the Shakespeare half of our audience went nuts over it, so that was great. This was from an Edna St. Vincent Millay play that I directed called Aria da Capo, and this is a shot of one of the scenes from that show. And we used every available nook and cranny, so we had pulled out a huge moon, and that became part of the scenery of the play, and it was about 50 feet off to the side. It's important to say that all of the pods that have been created in this space are all quite roomy. They're 6 feet apart from each other, and there are numerous kind of COVID-safe rules and regulations of attending the space that has made audiences feel very, very, very safe. This is a shot of the Kate Baldwin concert that we did out there. And we've been enhancing the lighting capabilities, the sound capabilities every time we go back out there. And that's that.
Terrific, Bonnie. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And we'll continue on with Jarvis. Jarvis, talk to us about what's happening up there in Vermont.
Absolutely. Thank you, Julie, and thank you, Bonnie. Yeah, my name is Jarvis. I'm the producing artistic director of JAG Productions, which is in White River Junction, Vermont, which is actually the original homeland of the Abenaki people. The mission of JAG is to bring more compassion, empathy, and love into the world by telling stories that challenge hierarchies of race, gender, class, and sexuality. All of our stories are written by, they are told by, and they are for Black, brown, queer, and trans folks and the people that love them. So when the pandemic hit, we were getting ready for our off-Broadway premiere of a new play called East Side's Table, which is written by Nathan Youngerberg. It was a co-production, it is a co-production with the Cherry Lane Theater. In the fall of 2019, we had the world premiere of his play here in White River Junction. And in March, we were in the middle of about to go into tech rehearsals for the off-Broadway premiere when the pandemic hit. And so we are just anxiously waiting to get back into the theater so that we can present this really beautiful, poignant play about these 3 African-American men on this mystical journey. And we're excited to sort of bring that to New York. Hi, Civic Theatre.
We're not professional. We're just
bring that to New York theater audiences. And so just like Bonnie, we too, we're just in our 4th year, but I was very hesitant to go into virtual programming and sort of went into this kind of pause and just sort of like see what is possible and how this pandemic was going to shape out. And so I really just started like thinking about the artists and how artists will be the ones to sort of help guide JAG Productions and a lot of, you know, nonprofit institutions into this sort of new way of, you know, reimagining theater. And so I reached out to a collaborator, Stevie Walker Webb, who was the director of East Side's Table. He did Ain't No Mo at the Public. He directed Ain't No Mo at the Public Theater, and we started to ask ourselves, and this was like sort of immediately after George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, and so we were in conversations about how we can tell Black stories completely absent from white ideas and white thoughts and white power structures. And so we came up with this idea of inviting 17 creatives to a farm in Vermont for the past month. We invited them into this creative process that we're calling the Black Joy Project. All of these artists, just like myself, were yearning to find and create spaces where we can be the most complete, whole self actualized version of ourselves. And so over the past month, we created this methodology, creatively speaking, that centered our Blackness and our queerness. And so for a month, we got to, be in conversation with each other and be in creative community in the splendor of nature on a remote farm. Over the month, we engaged with these series of questions and experiments and provocations and theater games and conversations and exercises and spiritual and practical rituals with a singular focus on freeing the Black creative spirit within. And so from our time together, we tested this methodology. We tried it in the fire of our Blackest truths and deepened our collective energy. And so right now we're working on this handbook that will be a tool for Black creatives and other people to just sort of engage with, like, how can we make Black theater moving forward. During this entire month, we captured the entire process. So in a month, we're going to be going into post-production for the film. And we'll have a month to sort of edit and make this film, which will be available to the public. And then we're also, during this month, we also started the draft of a new play that we're calling Black Joy Play. And so that's been the way that we've been sort of thinking about how we're moving forward, just giving space for artists to kind of, lead the way, essentially. After we sort of go into this post-production process with the film, I will start working on JAGFest, which is our New Works Play Festival, which is where Nathan Youngerberg's play was developed, as well as the Cherry Lane Theater. It's a festival where we get to spend, I invite 4 to 5 playwrights to come to Vermont in the middle of winter to develop a new play that sort of culminates into a stage reading. So we will bring artists here again, isolate them, work on the development of this new play, but instead of inviting audiences into the reading, we will record the readings for our audiences to see. So that's currently what we're working on. I'm really excited to go into post-production for the film. I am really amazed at how when you give artists time and space to heal, to be creative and not have an institution sort of hovering over them to tell them how to do things, what emerges. So yeah, thank you, Julie, for inviting me onto this panel, and I look forward to hearing about other folks' work.
Jarvis, thank you so much. And I see we have a question from Kit about funding. Kit, we are going to talk about funding in the next section. So if you can just hang on, Jarvis will circle back to that in the next section. Folks, if you haven't already, please be sure to mute yourself. People are sort of popping up, and I don't know if people know, but you do have the option to have a speaker view up in the upper right-hand corner, which tends to provide a little more focus if that's helpful to you. Meanwhile, next up in our description is Elisa Martin. Lisa, take it away.
Hello, thank you, Julie, so much for inviting me to be part of this panel. I'm thrilled to be here today with all of you, and thank you so much to Candid for hosting and producing. this exciting conversation. And I actually would like to go right to my slides so I don't have to repeat afterwards, if that's possible, Elizabeth. But while those are coming up, my name is Elisa Martin. I'm the Vice President of Arts and Events for Brookfield Properties in the Northeast. My job is to activate all of our public spaces with all kinds of activations, both arts and events. So things from fitness classes to ping pong to beer events, all sorts of things in our public spaces, which are lobbies, plazas, atriums, parks, any place that we can usually gather, which we can't do, of course, right now. Right here, you're looking at a picture of the Winter Garden Atrium in Lower Manhattan at Brookfield Place. Brookfield Place is our best known venue in New York City, though we do have 8 other buildings that we program here. Could I have the next slide, please? And for the arts portion of it, we support innovation in music, dance, theater, film, and visual art. And we basically push boundaries and invite artists in to come in and create in our spaces. And everything is free and everything is open to the public. That's part of our mission and has been for over 30 years. The next slide, please. So we've been around for over 30 years in New York, Toronto, and London, and the program expanded in about 2008 to LA, Denver, DC, Sydney, Perth, Melbourne, and Calgary. So, and we are about to have a program in Dubai, which is also very exciting. So it is a global program. As I said, my focus is very much on New York City and Washington, DC. And now if we could move to, actually it's about slide 12, we're looking for a picture of a plaza with butterflies. We're going to come back to some of this material later on in the session. There we go. So during the pandemic, we actually, our last public performance for a long time was on March 12th. It was the opening and closing night of the Flamenco Festival here in New York this spring. And then we had several months of recalibrating, as everyone did, and I'll talk about that in a second. The first thing that we could do on site, before I go to digital, the first thing we could do on site was install 2 art installations, and they were installed later than usual. So Ashley Longshore's piece, A New Beginning, which was actually reformatted after the pandemic began, was installed in July. It normally would have been installed in May. So this was installed in July on the facades of Brookfield Place. And then could I have the next slide, please? And the first major work that we could do, again, it went in about 3 weeks later than it was supposed to in July. This is by Jean Shin. It's Floating Maze. It is a piece about sustainability, and these are this beautiful maze, and underneath it feels like a real cornfield, is made out of Mountain Dew bottles. So it's a piece about consumption and sugar and plastic, among many other things. Next slide, please. But back to March and April. So one of the first things that Brookfield Place holistically did went to a BFPL at Home series where we had daily programming. And my team had the responsibility for 3 days of programming: Trivia Tuesdays, the Saturday morning show for kids, which we basically just punted right online, and more importantly, Friday features, which featured artists in their homes. Here you have Celise Henderson on the left performing, and then we have Brandy Younger and just Desron Douglas on the right. And then we also had interviews with artists, with visual artists and curators, and that is the middle slide showing Courtney Whitelock and Tom Kotick, one of our curators. Next slide, please. But in the meantime, it was clear that we didn't know how long this was going to happen. It was clear that we still don't know what kind of world we're going to be in, but that the digital world is going to be part of our vocabulary and Canvas in a much stronger way than it has been in the past, that is going to continue for us as a program. And the first 2 groups I approach are groups that we worked with before, because that's just when you start doing new kinds of work, it's sometimes easier to work with artists and groups that you know. So the Nerve Tank is a performance art collective that is based in New York City and Los Angeles. They did a piece for us many years ago where there were two performers dressed in suits and sunglasses. You can see a photo here in a plexiglass cube in the Winter Garden with screens inside, and people could text in instructions to the performers that they had to respond to, and then they did a little dance together, and then one of the performers swapped out. So it was a serial performance. It was about duration. It was 5 hours on site. It turned into 6 hours online. And being a corporate center, having random instructions typed to you from outside while you're in a cube wearing a suit really resonated with our audiences that are just naturally here at Brookfield Place. This was also long enough ago that we had a marketing person teaching people how to text in the Winter Garden. So in the Roots, we had to teach people how to text during this piece. But I was fascinated. I kept thinking about this piece really early on because of the box and the new box that we are all in, which was the Zoom Cube, which back in March was still really new for a lot of us. And dealing with the technology and the relationships between each other inside the box and the people outside the box that might be in your home or your apartment. And so I called up Melanie Armour and Chance Mulek, who run the Nerve Tank, and I said, I'm obsessing about your cube. And they said, we're obsessing about our cube too. And so they created the Attendance 2020. Could I have the next slide, please? Where they played, so both digital pieces I'm about to talk about required a lot of development work on part of these companies to deal with the platforms, how things talk to each other, how do you sync up in real time, all of that. All of their performers are performing inside their apartments. They all have screens that they can see both each other and the text that's coming at them that they need to respond to. And could we show the next slide, please? And again, durationally, the performances lasted 6 hours. So the performers would rotate in and out over 6 hours. Audience members came in and out, they texted, and this happened throughout the month of June. Meanwhile, can we go to the next slide, please? We worked with Theatre for One in the past, and we were actually in discussions with them about doing a project with us in real life this summer. For those of you who don't know Theatre for One, it is the brainchild of designer Christine Jones, and she has created a box for one performer and one audience member at a time. So in real life, it's a very small condensed box, and they're now working on a redesign to make it COVID friendly. But in the meantime, they're not able to perform in real life or in tangible physical properties. But just like Nerve Tank, the idea of you're live, you have a performer, you have an audience member, and then what is the space, right? That is the question that is facing a lot of theater artists, is what is that empty space that they're using, and how do they use that space to communicate? So Attendance chose one way of doing it with the texting back and forth. Christine's approach with her team was very much centered on what is the full theatrical experience? What is it like to wait in a lobby before the show? What is that connection that happens inherently and intimately between a performer and an audience member? And then what happens after the show where you can reflect on what you just saw? So could I have the next slide, please? So they commissioned 8 writers, most of whom they worked before. This is Regina Taylor performing her piece. You go in, you have a pre-show experience. I don't want to ruin it for you in case you actually manage to see it either with Arts Brookfield, or they are talking to a number of other organizations about extending the life of this project. So we have one performer, and you do not see yourself. You are actually in the room with the performer. This is exactly what you would see on the screen, full screen, is the performer performing. They respond, you can respond to them. They see and hear you, just like you see and hear them. So it is a very responsive, intimate performance that's played out. Could I have the next slide, please? And here are some more pictures of the different performers that you might see in this round of Theatre for One. Next slide, please. So we're finally back at a place in New York City where we felt comfortable doing very small scale performances for up to 6 audience members traveling together at one time. And we basically have been working with the COVID restrictions of under 50. The total parameters of this piece are under 25 people. So we will have no more than 25 people working on this experience at any given time down in the space, including the 6 audience members. And we are, next slide, please. You check in, everyone is masked. You get taken to an empty retail space. Next slide, please. And inside, you will experience a performance of some kind. Here you're seeing performers from the Knickerbocker Chamber Orchestra, who we were supposed to host here in April, performing small-scale performances. Everyone is masked in the room. The performers are 25 feet from the audience members, and the audience members are, clustered, but there are, several feet between them as well. Next slide, please. Okay, so that is where we are right now in terms of in-person performance. It's very successful. People are dying for in-person performances, everyone knows. And we're excited to dip our toe back in to live performance as well as the digital landscape. Back to you, Julie.
Lisa, thank you so much. That was great. And I can attest to the fact that if you can see theater for one, it's amazing how powerful it is. An incredible experience. Okay, and we're going to move on to Hazen. If you can join us here and talk a little bit about what you've been up to.
Yes, hello everyone. Let me just check and see. The sun is moving through my window, so I'm having to change my my setup a little bit so that you guys can see me. Okay. But yes, hello. Hi everybody. First of all, Candid, everyone at Candid, Joey, everybody else, thank you so much for having me. It's really an honor to be a part of this discussion because I think it is, obviously, I think as all the panelists and Julie can attest to, I think it's a really important time in our history of theater and art, as well as everything else, of course. But my name is Hazen Kyler. I'm the artistic director of the Greenhouse Ensemble. And during this pandemic, we worked with a consultant firm to change around our kind of our business structure. So we took this kind of downtime to work on that. So originally, our mission was to cultivate a positive, judgment-free environment where artists of any discipline create fully realized work. And according to our consultants, that's too vague. So now for you guys, I will read you our new mission statement. This is very exciting because you're the first audience to ever hear it. It's basically the first time I'm reading it out loud, so or in front of people. So our mission is to create an environment that nurtures deep-rooted engagement within our growing community. We cultivate audacity, weed self-doubt, and bring light to creative impulses, pushing our ensemble beyond their own expectations. Our multidisciplinary events compel and challenge audiences by immersing them in an atmosphere composed of diverse works of art. Well, that's very exciting, and that is what we do. For us, this transition period, I think, is a little bit different because we are a theater, film, art, and music company. So when the pandemic happened, it was a sort of natural transition for us to focus a lot of our energy into this kind of digital realm. To give you some kind of idea of how this transition happened for me, and then as it coursed through the company, at the beginning of the pandemic, originally we had scheduled a event that we do every year called our 10-minute play soiree, which is basically we ask for submissions from around the world from different playwrights. We get about 300 submissions. We read through every single one, and then we take our favorite 8 based on what we can determine as sort of the best writing. And then we pair those different 8 with 8 different directors, and we work with each of those directors as sort of a director roundtable throughout the entire process. So it becomes one kind of complete production versus something that's like a 10-minute play festival that you often see where people kind of drop in their productions. So we were scheduled to do our sixth 10-minute play soiree at the Tank. And then all of a sudden this happened. That obviously got postponed. And we were sort of left without, like everybody else, not sure what to do. And so one of the first things that I did, I write for a website called theaterpizzazz.com. And I decided, because I have always loved watching digital theater, unlike many people. And because I don't believe it has anything to do almost with the experience of theater at all. It has to do with the audience's ability to look at all the different elements that are there, and be able to experience what is I believe the best acting, the best writing, a different form of directing, and design within very specific limitations. So I think that it has real value. So I did a series initially reviewing the initial offerings of the National Theater on Theater Pizzazz, and then from there, my hope for that was to try to communicate some of the I guess importance and value to people maybe who didn't see theater, or who sort of don't care so much for kind of digital theater. So after that, a member of our company, her name is Bronwyn Sharp. She's a remarkable photographer from London. She had a recent show at Lincoln Center featuring her work on portraits of American playwrights. She and I are friends and colleagues, and she contacted me and said she was doing a series on CBC, and for CBC, which was documenting artists in Canada who no longer could work on whatever project they were working on. So what she would do, and she was taking portraits of them. And so I said, well, how in the world are you going to take portraits of people without actually being there? And so what she did was she set up her computer and set up kind of a backdrop. And then she worked with the artists to light them with like household items, lamps, things like that. And then she took these portraits with the computer as a part of the subject, as well as the backdrop of whatever her apartment is. And then you see the individual and then their environment. And so she asked to take a picture of me. I think we have a slide of this. It's basically a picture of me on a computer screen, if you have it. Maybe we don't. Yeah, that's it. So this was one of the portraits that gives you kind of an idea, and we're exactly where I am right now. Look at that. But this is kind of the idea. This moment in time that's sort of a new normal in the way that we're communicating and what our subject actually is that we're kind of talking to. So thank you. You can get rid of that. I need to see two of me. But that was the kind of inspiration, I think, to recognize just how much flexibility and potential we have as artists, even though we're separated by a great distance. And so the next thing that we did was we figured out what projects are we going to do with this new kind of means of collaboration. And also, Bronwyn was in London, we were in New York, eventually we were in Florida and then Michigan, and jumping all around. So this ability to work with different artists throughout space is an opportunity that I don't think should be overlooked when we're trying to create work. But so we figured out what projects we were going to do. And at first we created immediately a Zoom film. And I think we have a still of that too. It's one of them. But we created two different, right there. Yeah, it was called lifestyle content. And what we went through was it was a film that was made specifically for Zoom, but it forced the actors, and I think this is one of the benefits of our kind of reality of creation right now, is that it forced the actors not to just only be actors. It forced them to be set designers. It forced them to work on lighting. It forced them to take a part of their reality and change it in order to express whatever the vision was for them and for the piece. There was when I was at Michigan State, Susan Lori Parks, and I say this all the time, so I apologize. But she came to our school and talked to us, and she said one of the things that's really important about being an artist is that you have to have a really good interior, well, being recorded, bull crap, detector. You have to be able to look at something and be able to tell within yourself if that works or not. And I think that that's one of the main things that we can really utilize. As Julie, for instance, she shared an article earlier this week that was from I don't know, it might have been the New York Times or the New Yorkers. I've read so many articles lately. But it was designers talking about the importance of design in works, and I think that that's something that we really have to utilize more fully in our everyday kind of Zoom and new age of performances. Okay, you can get rid of that. The next thing that we did after that was so initially we had these two different projects that were set up. We had lifestyle content, and then we also had another film that was called Cross from Rome, about a couple who come across a obstacle that they're not able to surmount, basically. So they were the perfect couple. Everything's great. There's one little thing which turns out to be religion and a philosophical view of life that they can't quite make work, and that goes against their very nature. Oh, okay. I'll answer that later. So what we were doing in terms of making that work for a pandemic, because it's two people basically within their apartment talking with each other, and we're trying to do this. It's not a Zoom play. So what we were going to do is use puppets. We had a puppeteer who's also an actor. So we rehearsed the voiceover just as you would a normal play. I think we rehearsed it for 2 months or something like that, every day, 4 hours, to make sure that the voice work was as specific as anything else. And what happened was the expression of the voice, of course, results in the expression of the body as well. So these two very expressive actors, their voices were wonderful in the recording, but we felt that, well, we should do a reading of it, just because it's like they've done great work. It's really wonderful to watch. And so we did this reading, and all of a sudden we had a lot of people watching. And so we thought, well, this is probably a good sign of an opportunity to start to go forward in these kinds of readings, because there's an outreach component to all of this, that we have the opportunity right now to reach people in different audiences that are not just typical theater audiences, but people who maybe don't feel comfortable going to the theater, or have very little experience in theater, but have experience with things like digital streaming media.
Great, Hasten, thank you so much. It's all four panelists have brought up a lot of different areas to explore, and I think we'll circle back to a lot of the things that they are speaking about as we go. But we are going to turn our attention at the moment to talking a little bit about funding. For those of us who lived through the Great Recession in 2008, 2009, it was a very painful time for the arts. Charitable giving fell by about 15% in the United States. And coupled with that shortfall, funders increased their contributions to food banks and homeless shelters by about 10%. So we saw in the arts funding a decline of around 25%, potentially more. And it's hard to argue. The funders were moving money to, pick up the slack for feeding children, and it's hard to argue with the causation there. But it made fundraising in the arts even more difficult than it was, and certainly it's never easy. So my question to the panelists is sort of, how are you experiencing the current economic turmoil, and how are you preparing your organizations for potentially, what might be a long haul for getting the arts funding back, particularly since our government has not been as supportive as other places on the planet. Let me put it that way. So Jarvis, because you have some great news, I want to start with you, and I also want to invite you, because I forgot to prod you to show your photos. But it would be great if we could also, while you talk sort of about your funding, if we could look at some of those gorgeous photos that you have.
Beautiful, thank you. So that is on some little gorgeous spot on the farm where we took this photo. To the left is Stevie Walker Webb, who is my collaborator. In the middle is Marie Cisco, who's producer, and a dear friend. So that's us on Knoll Farm in Waitsfield, Vermont. That is Masaki Glover, who is a social worker and an actor, artist. The photo to the right of her, we gave all of our artists journals. So they journaled their entire process. They then handed over those journals at the end of the 4 weeks, and we are compiling essays and notes from these journals that will go into this methodology handbook. Great. This is one event that we did with the Pride Center of Vermont, which is one of our first virtual events, where we raised money for GLITZ, which is an organization that is doing incredible work for Black trans folks that were formerly incarcerated and bringing them back into society. And so we did an open mic night, which was sort of inspired by New York Theater Workshops, a virtual mic night where there are themes for each virtual open mic. And so we did an event to support this organization, and here are those are pictures of our artists who participated. Great, and then some of our staff and community members went down to DC no, this is hundreds of thousands, sorry. Stevie Walker Webb had a brother who is bipolar schizophrenic, and his brother had a sort of manic episode in the streets in his town in Waco, Texas. And someone called the police on him when he was just having a mental health crisis, and they arrested him, and his brother is in solitary confinement. And so Stevie, with the help of the Public Theater, went out to Waco, Texas, and built a jail cell, which is the size of his brother's jail cell, and did a sort of protest for 24 hours in this jail cell. So he did that right before he started the Black Joy Project. So that's what this last photo is. Great, thank you. Oh, so funding. August Wilson has this quote that I love, which is sort of interesting because August Wilson was a Montgomery Fellow at Dartmouth College, and our theater company is about 10 minutes from Dartmouth. I do some guest lecturing at Dartmouth. And he was a Montgomery Fellow at Dartmouth, and it's where he had the famous quote, "Black theater is alive and well, it just isn't funded." And you know, we struggled just like most Black theater companies in this country for the past 4 years. And then all of this, the protests that are happening in the streets, George Floyd's murder, Breonna Taylor, all this sort of social unrest that's happening in the country. And then all of a sudden we had this spike in donations where I mean, hundreds of thousands of dollars from various people from all over the country. Mostly our local audience that have been showing up to support our work, but like not really understanding the importance of having this institution in a predominantly white area. And for a long time, I was sort of there was a lot of gaslighting, like, why are you doing this in Vermont? And you know, Black folk have lived and brown folk have lived in all parts of the world from the beginning of time. And so the fact that, you know, Black theater has to be in an urban institution is just it's just a terrible argument and annoying. And so over the past couple months, we've had a spike in donations from various institutions, as well as foundations. We just received a $100,000 grant from the Bay and Paul Foundation. I don't know if you all saw the Mellon Foundation just administered a $5 million grant to 3 Black theater institutions, the Billie Holiday Theater, the Craft Institute, which is ran by a colleague of mine, Dr. Monica Ndunu, who is associate professor at Dartmouth, who teaches Black theater at Dartmouth, as well as Waco Theater Company in Los Angeles. And so as for like a long-term strategy, the Mellon Foundation gave these 3 institutions split $5 million for them to administer this money to Black theaters in the country. And I think there are 88 theaters. The proposal for that is due November 18th. And so, and I've been in conversations with the Cerna Foundation and various other things. So for me, it's, you know, we've been in the state of like really trying to get funding and going through like many various ways of like, you know, how can we support this work, to now getting a lot of responses and reactions and engagement with our work because of the state of this world right now in this country when it comes to social justice and racial justice work. So that's currently where we are as with funding. I think the biggest fear for me is that, you know, this will be a moment that will pass, and which is kind of what I'm feeling about the election, is that, you know, we'll go back to sort of status quo. And again, it will be hard for Black theaters to fund themselves because, you know, we'll just go into this place of status quo and just like sleeping on like how we can make theater, Black theater, more equitable for everyone. And so that's my fear. And I'm thinking about ways at which we can be thinking about long-term strategies with these foundations and with our donors, so that it's just not a moment that will pass as soon as we all forget that, you know, George Floyd died, Breonna Taylor died, and various other folks. So yeah.
Great, Jarvis, thank you. Thank you. You know, Bonnie, I'm excited to hear that your box office is doing better, but how is it going for funding? How are you seeing your funding, and how are you shoring up your company for the financial future?
I mean, there's good news and there's bad news. I mean, we've downsized our expense, our budget, our 2020 budget. We cut it in half. We cut it in more than half. We went from almost a $4 million budget to this year will probably be about 1.5 million. Most of my staff is furloughed. you know, we're all, the 9 of us that remain are doing, we're all wearing 50 different hats every day. We have seen, in some cases, an increase in foundation funding. In other cases, we've seen a decrease as they push their funding towards more health-related or you know, disaster-related nonprofits that are in dire need. We have certainly seen some very generous individuals step forward to help us, but we are really worried. We are not seeing the kind of influx that we of generosity that we hoped we would see in terms of protecting the institution. The money that we're making from ticket sales is so minuscule compared to what we would normally be making. We're worried that our state funding may not be at the level that we hope it will be. We are not even sure when it's going to come in. We are worried that our annual appeal, which is really the lifeblood of our fundraising effort, is not going to meet goal. We had to cancel our gala, which usually raises $250,000 in one night. We lost all of that money unless people are donating what the ticket price that they bought. Many of them are donating that back, and that's very helpful. And so not to downplay the amazing number of people that have come forward to help us as generously as they can, but in total, it's a fairly bleak outlook right now. And I think that while we may survive 2020 quite in still a fairly healthy position, if everything goes right, we're looking at 2021 in a much more pessimistic way and trying to figure out everything that we can do to either to keep functioning, to protect our artists, to try to get as many of our artists back on staff as possible, and to do what we do, and to somehow manage to do all of that without, we cannot afford to lose a penny. We have some debt that we have to pay back. So there's all kinds of factors at play, and
Bonnie froze up there for a minute.
oh, sorry. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
So I'm not sure where I left. Sorry.
I think, yeah, I think that it's very interesting, and I think, yeah, the fears are real, and I think Jarvis, as you were saying, you know, it's the sort of, when we come out of this, what sticks and what doesn't in terms of funding priorities. And I think that's a big, you know, concern and a big, you know, sort of pillar of uncertainty out there for everyone, regardless of how things are at this moment. It's sort of, where is everybody in a year from now? And I think we're all good to be keeping an eye on that ball, and hopefully, if you haven't already contacted your representatives about supporting, you know, about the need for funding of the arts and artists, then I encourage you to reach out and do that. One place that is interesting, you know, the performing arts require real estate, and you know, real estate, particularly in the urban centers, certainly in New York, is just ridiculous. But we've got to find space to bring the artists and audiences together. And one silver lining of the pandemic might be that in certain places we can redefine where and how the show goes on. And we saw this a bit, certainly in what Elise is doing at Brookfield. But I want to talk a little bit about adapting performance spaces and making use of public places. As early as 2018, the New York Times was reporting that 20% of retail in New York City was vacant. That's up from 7% in 2016. I would optimistically project that in my Manhattan neighborhood, about 50% of the retail is now gone. This is a nationwide trend hitting cities small and large. We've been hearing about the death knell for malls for ages, and national retail chains are sort of systematically closing outlets as this pandemic continues. So my question is, how do we get, as a source of potential support, how do we get retail spaces into the hands of the artist, and what kind of magic can we make there? So Hazen, I'm going to start with you, and if both you and Elisa could come on maybe and do your come on video, and just so we can talk a little bit about placemaking, public spaces. Hazen has a sort of Upper West Side art zoning project that he's been chasing, and what are some of the challenges to working with retail, and what are the potential upside here?
Well, I think, there's been two major studies, and then there was another one that was just released, I think, maybe yesterday, that was about, and granted, I have not dove into it. I haven't dived into it. I dove in something. But the first one from last year was Scott Stringer's creative economy study that he did, that was, I think, between 2008 and 2017, that really strongly details the effects of having arts in any kind of community, in terms of educational benefits, in terms of economic benefits, obviously economic benefits for all the different businesses that are around, not to mention individuals wanting to go to an area where there's arts. But then there's also a study that was done shortly after that, with the help of the League of Independent Theaters, which detailed kind of the economic impact of smaller theater companies. I mean, technically, it was like not Broadway, but still smallish, lesser than Broadway theater companies and their economic impact, which is significant. So in terms of, I think one of the things that I kind of strive for, and this is the third time I'm talking at Candid during this Arts Month, which is really, it warms my heart. It makes me very happy and proud. But the first time that I talked at Candid, I spoke about the importance for off-Broadway or independent theater communities and those different companies to come together to share resources and communicate with each other, and try to alleviate some of this competitive nature between us, to be able to share resources and share opportunities, because together there is the ability for I think economic growth and prosperity for individual artists and individual companies. I think that this is a similar situation, where being able to try and find a way for artists and art communities and collectives within cities or within neighborhoods that house a lot of different theater companies, to be able to be in communication with these kind of developers that clearly have open space that's not being rented. There should be a conversation that really addresses all of these very real benefits to having a thriving artistic community within your neighborhood.
Yes, and so you talk to me a little bit about what went on the Upper West Side. What was the primary barrier you hit in talking with landlords about why they didn't want to play ball?
Well, I haven't really come across anything like that. I mean, where landlords have been just said no. My vision for the Upper West Side Theater District, which is the kind of the name that we're going with right now, is there. It started mostly because I had done work with well, with my company on the Upper West Side, as well as the Russian Arts Theater on the Upper West Side, in different locations on the Upper West Side, different venues that are like a 5-minute walk from each other. And as I began to meet these kind of the people running these different institutions, it became very apparent that no one was talking to each other. Nobody knew about the other buildings. Nobody even knew geographically where they were, and they were 5 minutes away. There's a lot of different larger buildings on the Upper West Side and throughout all of Manhattan. The churches in Manhattan cover 13% of all of Manhattan's real estate. So the key with that is about communication within that kind of anchor point, those kind of venues that are available and do not have the same kind of, are not operating at their, I mean, pre-pandemic, their necessary capacity. And part of that is a marketing issue. In terms of reaching out to landlords, I've spoken at different, I go to our community board meetings and I talk for my minute until they tell me to sit down. And then I go to the Gale Brewer's religious task force meetings, which focus on the trying to make religious institutions more economically stable. So I talk at both of these different institutions. What seems to be vague, and I think that this is similar within the off-Broadway theater community, is there's not really a clear path as to how do we actually get in how do I don't know what phone number to call to call like this real estate, this person who owns this building, and try to have a conversation with them about the benefits of having art in their building. So that lack of transparency, and I don't mean that in like a negative term. I simply mean that we're kind of in the woods of who to turn to. So I think that becomes the major obstacle in a lot of this.
Yes, I know that in New York City, at least, they are trying to make it easier. There's been a couple of articles out, and I think there's actually a city council meeting today to try and make it easier for people to get public permits. Lisa, you're in a situation, a very unique situation that has its own challenges. What do you, in terms of the flow at Brookfield Properties between the spaces that you program work into, how does it work? What's the relationship between the real estate spaces and the work? And what information can you share with us on that?
Sure. So the public spaces are the public spaces. So we are able to program and we are able to plan for the atriums and the plazas and the lobbies on long-term leads. We can commission 2 to 3 years out. We can also pop something in at the last minute if the right opportunity shows up and we still have the budget dollars for it. So the public spaces have a lot of flexibility. And in terms of working in public space, it takes a different kind of muscles for artists to get used to that work. So as artists are thinking about moving into the public realm, into the parks, and we're also partnering with the Downtown Brooklyn Partnership over at Metro Tech to expand their rehearsal outdoors program that they have at 300 Ashland. It takes a little bit of getting used to the idea that people are going to come up and talk to you, and pigeons are going to poop on you. And there are just a lot of things that happen in public spaces that don't happen in what I would consider a very traditional, safe rehearsal space. So that's part of, if you're thinking about moving into public space, some things to think about. The other thing too, in terms of empty retail, we actually, as a program, go through phases of using empty retail more or less, depending on what's available. Brookfield has a very strong leasing team, and there usually is not a lot of space to actually do work in. If we end up showing the slides, a lot of the work that you're going to see in empty retail space happens right before Brookfield is going to renovate someplace. So it's slated for some kind of renovation, which means that there's a moment to have these long-term discussions and long-term plans as retail empties out for construction work to begin. But in terms of like a normal cadence and working and the empty retail spaces that we currently have available that we're doing work in, There are a bunch of considerations to, again, keep in mind as you're thinking about working in retail. Just like when you're selling a house or an apartment, and it's like every showing could lead to that offer, right? So like every time someone shows up to look at your house, you're hoping that they're going to like make the offer so you can sell your house. So that is also how leasing works in terms of the mindset, right? Any tour that they bring through could lead to that deal. So they want to have the ability to lease it in a heartbeat, right? So that timing is one of the things that gets challenging when we're talking about doing performance and performance groups or development work inside empty retail, is the short-term commitment. So I know right now that I have an empty retail space through December. I keep talking as if I have an empty retail space through the end of March. I won't actually know that until sometime in November. So right now I can commit to things through December 31. I cannot make a commitment on a space. I can make a lot of plans. I can talk to artists. I can potentially pay them a little bit of a development fee to kind of get work going. But I don't know if I actually have a space between January 1st and March 31st until November. It's a really short lead time. And so it's from my perspective, it's a lot about teeing up projects. It's about teeing up artists. How can it fit into the work that they're already doing? What kind of space could they need? So that's one big thing in terms of what is it. And then there's the second thing of what does it look like when the artists are in the space? And to the untrained eye, a rehearsal room can look a little sloppy. So particularly if you're giving a leasing tour. So what the space looks like is really important. And that's the branding on the windows. That's what people see when they walk by 24/7. And during the opportunities for leasing to get in there, what does that space look like when they take a tour through, and how is it impacted? So again, if I show pictures, you'll see a lot of things that look very pretty. And a lot of that is a very pretty front. And in the back, there is, okay, could you go to the next slide, please? So this is a good example. This is the Habeas Lounge at One New York Plaza in 2009. Prior, we had a lot of space at One New York Plaza right before its renovation of the concourse area. And this installation is by an artist named Linda Pollock. It is about civic dialogue and changing the format of civic dialogue. And she has this couch that she's particularly designed so that it encourages different kinds of conversations and deals with hierarchy in a different way. And it looked beautiful. It looked beautiful whenever it wasn't being used actively. She had different activation hours from like 12 to 4 that it was activated and people could come in, but it always looked great for anyone who walked by. Can we go to the next slide, please? And the next slide. Here we go. This is Third Rail Projects, who did, again, a series of projects at One New York Plaza prior to its renovation. And you can see on the left a storefront that they actually did work with. And then they basically had a big open space behind this storefront that they could then use as rehearsal space and development space for their projects. So it was, and they kept it super neat. And on the right-hand side is a picture of a different portion of their installation. This happens to be a giant, big, old flower shop. So they could actually have the window part. They could have, we normally have a requirement to communicate with the communities in which we do business. So this was for their Fridays. They set up a specific space with couches, again, for people to come in and talk to them about the work that they were doing and to get ideas. They actually gained a board member out of this residency. Ultimately, they had such a fan. So that's one of the other things. We've got it being in shape, looking like what does it look like from inside and outside, and what are the activation hours. People don't want to, if you're giving over a space, you don't necessarily want it activated 1 hour a week and then just empty the rest of the time. So the commitment of activation is very important to us as well. And I think that's it for the slides for the moment. Thank you.
That's terrific. Thank you. I'm putting into the chat a link to a project in Miami that's really interesting that was announced recently, which involves multiple retail and the 7 deadly sins, which is always exciting. So it does seem like all of this is possible, and with those caveats, it's really helpful to hear sort of what the landlords are looking for in terms of proposals. And of course, the big question becomes about funding. I mean, my own perspective is that it's in the retail's best interest if the neighborhoods remain lively. And if you have no reason to go downtown, regardless of what size your town is, if you have no reason to go downtown, there are no stores open, then people are going to get out of the habit of going downtown. So how do we keep various spaces, and how can the arts lead in helping to keep some of these places from becoming ghost towns? And we've seen it be successful in Detroit, in Berlin, other places where the arts have led by partnering with public spaces and with developers and the like. We just need to see how we close the money gap. And I think that's the piece of the puzzle that the government has to start helping out with. Because there's a lot weighing on all of us in the arts, I want to have a fun moment before we hand this over to questions, of a sort of magic wand moment. And to all of our panelists, if you could join me and unmute yourselves. What do you wish for the performing arts when we fully emerge from this pandemic? And what changes do you want to see stick? What bad habits do you hope don't return? And, yeah, let's go there. Magic wand, you get to make anything stick you want, and you get to get rid of anything you want. Who would like to go first?
I can go first.
Go for it.
Brave the waters here. I actually am really excited by all the access that people have right now to different companies and different artists globally that they may not have had previously or thought of previously. And I know a lot of that content right now is being offered for free in hopes of donations. Like I understand that there's a lot of stuff going on, but the idea that I can watch something from London, that I can see something in Israel, that they can watch a New York theater company or a California theater company is really exciting, and that there is no longer the barrier of a ticket price or the cost of a ticket, which particularly in New York City can be quite prohibitive for an amazing theatrical experience. So I would love to see continued access and audience growth. However, at the same time, and this is the magic part for me, is that I want real living wages for the artists and everyone and all the people that it takes to create these experiences. I don't know how to do that, but that's the magic part.
Yeah, indeed. Living wages would be a complete turnaround. I mean, it's always plagued the arts. We've always underpaid artists. I mean, I look at even Broadway wages. When you start really looking at them, it's barely, a good middle class wage. If you work 52 weeks on Broadway every year, you're making a decent middle class wage with decent middle class benefits. It's not like you're suddenly, running a corporation and making hundreds of $1,000s a year. It's crazy that that's the sort of, arguably the pinnacle of, what everybody aspires to is a Broadway show. And even that, it's a gamble, and the wage is not that, spectacular. It's good, but it's not spectacular. And how do we beef up our expectations of salaries in this crazy industry? Bonnie, what's your magic wand moment?
Well, listen, I if I had a magic wand, I would, nothing against online programming, but My hope would be that that at the end of all of this, that all of the exposure that people have had to the arts online, and certainly it has expanded people's horizons, as we were just saying, but as Alyssa was just saying, but I hope it does not create a habit of watching the arts online only and not going to the symphony in person, or the ballet in person, or the opera in person, or the theater in person. I fear that that laziness will figure heavily in this, and that people get too comfortable with watching the arts online, because it's not the same. It's not the same at all. And the experience of being with a group of people and gathering communally, and to see people in the flesh, and to share that space and that breath and that air, which will hopefully be COVID-free very soon, is something that I hope that this experience of the pandemic will whet people's appetites for live arts rather than diminish it. That's my magic wand hope.
And you did see that in some ways, right? When you came back, people were really hungry just by virtue of, I know you were deeply limited in capacity and ticket price, but the response was very, very quick.
The response was quick, and the feedback was extraordinary. I mean, people really did. You could tell there was this that they were there was a thirst for it that needed to be quenched, to be back in the flesh, experiencing all of the strange magic that a live performance engenders in people. And so, yes, I think it was. I think it is something for the people that were already live theater fans. That is the return of live performance is going to be quite welcome. My hope, my magic wand hope, is that for the people who weren't particularly into live performance, that somehow the viewing of things online will either tire them out so much that they want to go see something live, or that it has made them discover new artists and new performance institutions that will make them leave the house and go buy a ticket for a live show.
Excellent. Yep. Jarvis, you want to have a magic wand moment?
Magic wand moment. I've really been enjoying how much I've been engaged with like various different organizations around the country, being in conversation with each other and not being so siloed. I think, you know, once this is all behind us, I still want to be able to connect with all of these panelists that I just met for the first time, which I don't think I would have been able to meet, you know, me being in Vermont and most of everyone in the New York metropolitan area. So being, continuing to stay in conversation with each other. I think also I remember during, like, right when the pandemic hit, like ticket prices like for Broadway was like much more accessible, right? And my magic wand would be like, you know, can theater going be like more accessible to folks that can't afford, you know, a couple $100 tickets? And I hope that, you know, like Bonnie was saying, just now that we have access to online programming and things like that, I just hope that, like, you know, once we can get back into the theater, folks that may not have been going to the theater and have been viewing things online, that like there's an accessibility for them to be in the space, so that we can actually take theater going like back to its like truest form, which is like for the people and not like this like elite art form.
Yeah, one of the, Carrie Lee Riley asked about bringing younger people who are very conditioned to being online 24/7 in one way or another. You know, she said, I was a professor and I had to offer extra credit if they went to the theater for the students to go to the theater. So any thoughts about how this pandemic may or may not affect the difficulty of, it's interesting, Jarvis. I mean, I wonder if the answer isn't partially in what you just said. It's bringing the work to the people as opposed to insisting the people go to the work. And how do we break down those barriers that it isn't as much a community art form as, especially things like opera. You think about opera has become so sort of rarefied for the most part. How do we get some of these art forms back out there into the communities? And is it through real estate?
Right. Yeah, I just saw, like, a friend of mine posted that he lives in Inwood, and he posted that in his neighborhood, like, the New York Philharmonic was doing like a free concert in his neighborhood the other day. And he recorded, like, folks coming out of his building and walking down the street, and there is the New York Philharmonic doing this like free concert. So I hope that, like, that sort of and that, again, that was brought to the people, right? I hope that sort of like engagement and offering can still happen once this is all over.
Julie, can I just add something to that? I think that I think that what is something that all of us as artists have to really pay attention to as this pandemic winds down, whenever that may be. I mean, the way to get art and audiences together, those ways are numerous. But the best way is to create an appetite and love for art and for artists when people are young, which means we have to get art into the schools. And my deepest fear right now over anything is that when we start to recover, that the arts will not make it back into the school curriculums, or even in any kind of way, whether it's after school or during school, extracurricular activities. We've already seen a horrifying diminishment of art in school. And right now, all of us are struggling about how to get art to kids online during all of this, and how do we work virtual art, how do we work the arts into virtual learning? And so I think that that's something that all of us have to be really, really, really attentive to as we start to pull out of this, that we make sure that the arts are not left behind as schools regroup and rethink how they're going to educate young people. And so, I agree that yes, sometimes you want to do your art in your own space, but the more we can get out there, indeed, the better. But getting out there is, I think, most important in regard to the school situation. That's where we need to get out there the most.
Great. Hazen, you want to have a magic wand moment?
A magic wand? Okay, fine. You talked me into it. I like everything that everybody else said. I think that all of the magic that everyone has done today is just wonderful. I think there seems to be a pattern, and I think it's kind of clear that historically it seems that artists move into areas and make them popular, and then those areas price out artists, and then those artists move out of those areas and into different areas, and then that cycle seems to continue. And I think that what I would hope will happen in the future is that, and with a magic wand, of course it will, is for people to recognize the benefits, like what everyone here has said, that come with having arts in your community, and recognize that the economic and social benefits that happen are largely because of the artists that are creating work and making that area interesting and developing an aesthetic identity for that area. So the magic wand, and one of the things that I'm very hopeful for right now, are like these empty storefronts. That it provides an opportunity for audiences, especially if it's kind of based in neighborhoods, so it's condensed a little bit, so audiences know where they can go to see really good art, which is a plug for the Upper West Side Theater District. But that I went to Amazon, or not Amazon, Whole Foods, which is Amazon, for the first time when I got back into the city, and it was in our neighborhood. And I thought, I mean, the thing that surprised me, and that Whole Foods has been there for a long time, and I walked in, and it's totally like sterile, necessarily so, but also there's like no one working there. All of these self-checkout things, I mean, it's just a void of human beings actually needing to do work. And so with these empty storefronts, we're getting to a place where I hope something like a universal basic income is possible for artists and other people, so that we can use these different spaces that we have that might not be so necessary to create really to have an identity and a presence that's a more universal understanding of art from people of every kind of walk of life and age group.
Terrific. We're all on the same page about this. Boy, I'm putting a lot of hope in the sort of real estate arts partnership it's really been done so successfully in such a visionary way by Brookfield Properties, where they really value the idea that art is part of what real estate is. And here, shameless self-plug, here's an article I wrote trying to get a movement going on this. We are going to shift into some questions from the audience. One that came up earlier, and I invite all of the panelists to talk about this. You know, where do actors go right now? And, you know, what advice do you have for actors who are completely displaced, while the film and television world and some of this online activity is helping? It's not replacing income, certainly, and film and television is starting to get back up. I have a foot in that world as well, and it's slow, and for the smaller players, it's very, very difficult because we can't get insurance. But I'm curious about any advice the panelists have for actors, and whether they think, I believe the rest of the question was whether they believe that virtual auditions will stick. Come on. Other questions from the audience? Bonnie, you want to take a shot at giving some advice to actors?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I'm not sure that I am filled with advice, but I can say this. I think that one of the side effects of this pandemic is that companies are going to start, and who knows, it's going to depend on how long the darn thing lasts. But I think more and more we're certainly thinking about gathering artists together as large a group and as diverse a group as we can get together, to get them to, if this continues, to basically self-isolate and quarantine for a while, so that we have a larger COVID-safe company, so that we can keep people employed year-round as much as possible. And so the more that other companies start to think in the same way, I mean, you know, this will help get actors back, not only doing what they want to do and what they should be doing, but with some kind of living wage, some way to live and survive while they do their art. And I hope that a lot of companies start to think about this way if this thing is going to go on much longer. And of course, we don't know the answer to that yet. It's all going to depend ultimately on a vaccine. Because it's one thing to protect your audience in a variety of measures as they come into the theater. But if you want to do live theater without the actors wearing masks, they must be a group that's quarantined together. So I'm really starting to think out of the box in that regard too. How do I make that happen? How can I get funding to make that happen? You know, all of those things. But in terms of auditioning, and that's the thing that I can say, you know, people have been doing more and more online auditions or video auditions over the past, particularly 5 years. I hate them personally, but the reality is what the reality is. So we do use them and have hired people from those video auditions. The problem is actors do need to get better at it. And there are resources that they can go to get coaching on how to do a better video audition. Because frankly, the better it is, the better the chance of us either in the future calling you in person so that we can do a you know, in the flesh and blood audition, or that we are interested enough from what you have submitted video-wise to keep you on file and to then revisit that audition or to ask you to do a different one, very specific to the show that we may be contemplating at the time. So that's really, you know, all my empathy for the of all the theater people right now, of all the different kinds of theater people, my empathy for the actors is the greatest, because a lot of us who do other things in the theater can do other things that do feed us creatively. But I think that not being able to get up in front of an audience is a very, not just financial horror story for actors, but it's starving them of the very food that feeds them. And so I feel that the more that artistic leaders can find ways of gathering people together, as Jarvis has done, gather people together, give them these opportunities. Whether the audience ends up seeing it in person or virtually is a whole other matter. But let's find ways of getting the artists back, both making money and doing art in as many bizarre ways as we can.
Yeah, and it's been, you know, it's funny how quickly the NBA figured it out, you know, where there's, you know, big box office at stake, and to a lesser extent, the NFL, that people are starting, and Tyler Perry, I mean, he resumed film production really fast because
he's doing the exact right thing. That's exactly right.
Yeah, so there are certainly examples of where that's a success, including your theater company, Bonnie. You managed to make that happen where you had a group quarantining together. Yeah. I think it's a great point. Yeah. Hazen.
Yeah, just a quick thing. I think I don't know too much about the audition situation. I think that there's an ease, obviously, to doing these virtual auditions, and I think that Bonnie's absolutely right in terms of being able to do it better. And I think that goes to the same point, which is, or similar point, which is, I mean, and this is just my philosophy, but I think that there's a quote that I said poorly during an interview recently that was from Neil Gaiman, who talked about, it was a commencement speech that he gave, which was basically in times that are good and times that are bad. His advice to this group of artists was to just make good art. And so I think my advice during this whole pandemic, and I can't say too much about audition. I think you should keep auditioning, and you should, like what Bonnie said, get better at understanding lighting, and get better at understanding framing. And in those skills, even from an audition standpoint of having to develop a piece for an audition, you will begin to understand some of the basic workings of filmmaking. And then that can start to move you into creating your own projects. And that is kind of what I hope people start to do, is that I hope everyone is back together soon. I'm a little bit on the side of, I like the future of digital theater. I like the idea. I believe that virtual reality theater is going to start coming eventually in the near future. But my advice is to work within the confines of what we have, similar to the article that you presented us with before that I mentioned earlier about this designer saying, when you're in a garden, use the garden. Use the confines that we have and create something really inspiring for other people and for yourself, for the growth of yourself as an artist.
Terrific. Jarvis, you want to pop in?
Yeah, I think, you know, if I had any kind of advice for actors, I think it's like really about finding your tribe, like finding directors and actors and companies that you enjoy working with and being in conversation with them, cultivating those relationships, because I think that like a big part of this moment right now is asking nonprofit institutions to redefine and restructure the old ways at which we've been causing harm to artists. And so I think a lot of these artists don't want to go back into some of these institutions, right? And are taking this pause to really think about how and who they want to be engaging with in the future. You know, similarly to the Black Cherry Project and having these artists sort of, a lot of them knew each other, a lot of them did not know each other. But I think it was really important for me as like the producer and the founder of JAG was to just sort of be able to create this safe space, truly, and we hear this term all the time, but literally a safe space where people can, where artists can like have demands and say what they need and not be afraid that like they won't get hired or they will be, you know, reprimanded for asking what they need in a process that is truly holy, right? To be making any kind of theater, it's a spiritual, holy practice. And so I would just say find your people and find your tribe. And I charge any sort of nonprofit institution right now in this moment to just really look internally within your institution and figure out ways of like making your institution more equitable, more just, more safe for white folk, for Black folk, for trans folks, for Indigenous folks, before we kind of go back to normal, if you will. Yeah, so those are my thoughts.
Terrific. Kit Baker, I saw, I think, a hand up. Do you have a question you'd like to pose? Okay. To that end, thank you. He was applauding Jarvis. Yes, I mistook the hand for a raised hand to an applauding hand. Zoom codes are continuing to be understood. Jarvis, to that end, are there, I'm wondering to all the panelists, are there, I don't want to rag on the unions. They're all having a tough time as well. But I'm curious if there are any specific rules of the game that you know, you feel like will help to bring more equity. And frankly, you know, it's always mystified me why we do these 10 out of 12s. And at the end of 12 hours, producers get together with the director and the writer and whoever else needs to be in the room. And then we make money decisions after sitting there for 12 hours. And I've just always thought this is a really ridiculous idea, that is the way that priorities get set and decisions get made at the end of an exhausting day. And I know it's about money in part, but it's also now about ritual, where we've just ritualized this, the hours in which we work and the sort of that it's tech's got to happen and, you know, this 72-hour period or whatever it is. And I'm wondering, panelists, if you could all turn on your audio and video here, what rules have you encountered that you'd like to shove back at now, and that you feel will be better if we can eliminate them?
I think in terms of equity, I think that artists should be able to, if they want. I mean, there seems to be some limitations if you're working for a non-equity theater or a non-equity production. There's limitations on the amount of time that actor can rehearse or is allowed to rehearse. And I understand the reason for it, but I mean, I don't know. I trained with Alexei Barago at the Russian Arts Theater and Studio, so everything is sort of about breaking rules and kind of intensity, as everyone has. But I think the amount of time that people are able to put into a project if they want to, and then also the inability for people who are equity members to be able to promote their work virtually, now that we're in this kind of new age, and even before it. But for theaters not to, smaller theater companies to not be able to, unless you spend a lot of money, promote your show or share it with other people so that they can see the kind of work that's happening all around them, I think is a disservice to all of the artists and the different companies creating work.
Jarvis, you want to chime in?
Yeah. Gosh, I guess I don't know if equity can be a part of this, but I think as like when it comes to like BIPOC theater making, or or BIPOC folks in general, so like as the global majority, I think a bare minimum of 50% of BIPOC representation in programming and personnel, both on and off stage, is like truly important. Like I think this applies universally to all hiring tiers of Broadway, off-Broadway, regional theaters, funding recipients, artistic commissions, production departments, front of house staff, offices, professional training centers, unions, agencies. I think it's important to have that equitable presence and demanding that sort of 50% BIPOC representation. I think that as far as a code of conduct, I think that there should be structures for our protection in white spaces and with white artistic collaborators. Like I feel like that anti-racism must become a mandatory, well-budgeted and explicit core value within some organizations. And I think that, like, honestly, there's, in the theatrical world, there's this conversation around safety first. And anti-racism is what makes us safe. And so demanding safe and exclusive affinity spaces where BIPOC protection in all institutions should be required. And that includes anti-racist support staff and how that should be available at all time, which will help with like hostile environments and racial harassment and all of that. So that's kind of where my thoughts are with that, and how we can really look internally within our institutions and within our practices before we can truly say that we're like an equitable, just like art form.
Thanks to the panelists so much. You guys have been terrific, and I'm very grateful. And with that, I'm going to kick it back to Joey.
There I am. Thank you everyone so much for doing this. You people were absolutely amazing, and thank you so much for your generosity and for all the wonderful information that you provided with us this afternoon. And once again, thank you as well. Have a great day, everyone, and all the best, and break a leg.